it's Jayson Tatum.
Brunson will make a move.
And Smart coming back again.
And fouled with 29.2 seconds remaining.
The Celtics still had star power on their roster, but their newest playoff collapse brought back an old question that Red Auerbach used to ask about his own teams, who really let the Celtics down. In the 2025-26 season, Boston ran into Philadelphia in the first round and lost in a way that stunned their own fans. Jayson Tatum shot just 7 for 20 from the field and watched several possessions slip away with nothing to show for them. Jaylen Brown got tangled up in foul trouble and turned the ball over at the worst moments. In Game 6, the whole team fell apart in the third quarter, and the season ended early. Brad Stevens reacted fast. He sent Jaylen Brown to Philadelphia in a trade for Paul George and a stack of draft picks. Kendrick Perkins went on TV and ripped into the decision, asking whether the front office itself had let the Celtics down this time. And while we look back at the standard Red refused to lower, use the hype feature and give this video some hype if you believe Celtic pride should still mean something. Long before Tatum, Brown, or Stevens, there was Red Auerbach, and he built his Celtics on rules that never bent for anybody, no matter how much talent they carried. Every time a Celtic player put himself before the team, Red found a way to push back. Sometimes it was a joke. Sometimes it was a public insult. Sometimes it ended in a trade. This video looks at 7 players Red believed had let the Celtics down in one way or another. Some of them were legends who simply slipped for a moment. Others represented something much bigger breaking apart inside the locker room. What did Red see in each one of them, and why did talent alone never buy anyone a pass? Some of these 7 players still went on to be Hall of Famers. Others never fully recovered their place in Boston. Red judged all of them by the exact same measuring stick, and that stick had nothing to do with fame, money, or personal stats. It only asked one question. Did you help the Celtics win tonight? That question sounds simple, but it shaped nearly every decision Red ever made, from who he drafted to who he traded away at the peak of his own frustration. It did not matter whether a player was a rookie or a 10-time champion. The question stayed exactly the same, game after game, season after season. Red Auerbach won 9 championships as the head coach of the Boston Celtics. After he stepped away from the bench, he won 7 more as an executive building the roster. 16 championships gave his opinions a kind of weight that almost nobody else in basketball ever had. Red cared about players who could run the floor, play tight defense, pass the ball, and sacrifice their own shot for the good of the group. He called this approach the Celtics way, and it became the standard every player had to meet the moment he put on the jersey. In public, Red protected his players. He often stood in front of reporters and took the blame for a loss himself, even when a player's mistake had caused it. That protection stopped the second the locker room door closed. Inside those walls, Red held players to a much harder line. He went after anyone who looked out of shape, anyone who played selfish basketball, and anyone who seemed to care more about personal stats or a bigger paycheck than winning games. Sometimes his criticism was a punishment meant to sting. Other times it was simply a tool, something Red used on purpose to keep the whole roster sharp and afraid of getting comfortable. This creates 2 very different kinds of stories in the 7 cases ahead. The first 3 players were already winners. Red trusted them enough to push them hard because he believed they could take it and come back stronger. The last 4 players represented something else entirely. Red saw their habits as a real threat to the identity of the franchise itself, not just a bad habit that needed fixing. Keep that difference in mind as the list goes on, because it explains why Red handled some of these 7 with a joke and others with a trade. His methods look extreme by today's standards. But 16 championship banners hanging in the rafters gave Red's rules a kind of credibility that is very hard to argue with. Red also understood something that many coaches never fully grasp. A locker room is not just a group of talented individuals sitting in the same room. It is a delicate balance of egos, habits, and unwritten rules. And one careless player can throw that whole balance out of order in a matter of weeks. Red watched this happen more than once during his years running the Celtics, and every single time he stepped in to correct it, whether that meant a joke at practice, a public jab to a reporter, or a trade that shook up the entire roster. He believed that letting one small habit slide would eventually open the door to bigger problems down the road, so he rarely let anything slide at all. The first name on Red's list was a Hall of Fame scorer who spent years absorbing more criticism than anyone else on the roster, not because he deserved it more, but because Red knew exactly how much he could take. Tommy Heinsohn was one of the best scorers of his era, and a key piece on 8 championship teams. Yet somehow, he became Red's favorite target inside the locker room. Red understood something important about Heinsohn. The man had thick skin. He could take a hard verbal beating and shake it off without carrying a grudge into the next game. That made him the perfect example for Red to use. By tearing into Heinsohn in front of the whole team, Red sent a clear message to every single player on the roster. Nobody was too good to be criticized. Heinsohn could score 20 points and grab a dozen rebounds in the first half of a game, and Red would still find something to complain about at halftime, usually about how sloppy his warm-up had looked. Conditioning was one of Red's favorite targets when it came to Heinsohn. Red once said that Heinsohn had the oldest 27-year-old body in the history of sports. That line stuck around for decades because it captured exactly how Red felt about players who let their fitness slip. This was not just a joke meant to embarrass somebody. Boston's entire offense depended on speed. The team ran the floor on every possession, pushed the pace after every rebound, and tried to score before the other team could set up its defense. A player who was out of shape slowed that whole machine down, and Red would not tolerate it, no matter how many points that same player scored the night before. Red also assigned Heinsohn a job that had nothing to do with basketball skill. For his first 2 seasons, Heinsohn carried the team's ball bag to every single game. That chore normally went to the newest rookie on the roster and nobody else. Bill Russell had refused to carry it when he was a rookie, and Sam Jones, who rode to games in Russell's car, could not carry it either because Russell would not allow the bag anywhere near his vehicle. Rather than pick a fight with Russell over something so small, Red simply left the job on Heinsohn's shoulders long after his rookie year had ended. It kept the peace inside a locker room full of massive egos, and it cost Red nothing to let Heinsohn carry that weight instead. None of this means Heinsohn's scoring excused him from the small stuff. Being a great player did not put him above routine chores or basic preparation, and Red made sure everyone understood that. He believed that visible accountability, out in the open where teammates could see it, mattered more than protecting any one man's pride, even a star's. Heinsohn's story shows that even a hugely talented player could chip away at team discipline through the smallest kind of carelessness, one bad warm-up or one avoided chore at a time. Still, none of the research paints Heinsohn as any kind of failure. He was a winner, through and through, and Red used him carefully as a psychological tool rather than punishing him out of real anger. It also says something about Heinsohn's character, that he never seemed to resent the constant attention. He understood, at least in hindsight, that Red was not attacking him out of spite. Red was using him to teach a lesson to every other player in that locker room, veterans and rookies alike, and Heinsohn was strong enough to carry that weight without letting it break him down. Few players could have handled years of that pressure and still walked away with 8 championship rings and a genuine friendship with the coach who criticized them the loudest. The next player on Red's list was not called out for a bad performance on the court at all. He was called out for what he chose to eat before a game even started. Sam Jones became one of the greatest clutch shooters in Celtics history and won 10 championships playing under Red. But even a player with that kind of record was not safe from Red's rules about physical preparation. The story starts on a road trip to Syracuse. The team had just landed after a late flight, and a group of players stopped at a diner to grab a bite before heading to the hotel. Sam Jones ordered pancakes. As soon as Red saw the plate arrive at the table, he reacted immediately, hitting Jones with a $5 fine on the spot. Red believed pancakes were a terrible choice for a professional athlete. He argued that a heavy stack of pancakes would sit in a player's stomach for hours, weighing him down and slowing his legs during Boston's fast breaks. Jones tried to laugh it off. He joked that since he was already being fined for the meal, he might as well finish every bite and get his $5 worth. Red did not budge an inch, and the fine stood. What makes this story so telling is how rare it actually was. Across his entire career as head coach, Red only issued 4 fines total. 3 of those were for players breaking curfew, a much more obvious kind of rule breaking. The 4th belonged entirely to Sam Jones, and it was for nothing more serious than ordering the wrong breakfast on a road trip. Jones treated the whole thing like a joke, but Red never saw it that way. To Red, showing up physically unprepared even in a small way like a heavy meal was still a way of letting the team down. A championship resume did not earn Jones an exception. Red viewed careless eating habits as a genuine threat to the system he had built, not some private choice that only affected one player. The diner, the pancakes, the $5 fine, and Jones's joke about getting his money's worth all combined into one of the most memorable small stories about Red's obsession with discipline. It never grew into a real feud between the two men. it stayed exactly what it was. A strange and pointed lesson about how seriously Red took physical preparation. Years later, players who heard the story from teammates who had been there still repeated it as proof of just how far Red would go over something that most coaches would never even notice, let alone punish. It became one of those small locker room legends that outlived Red's own coaching career, passed down from veteran to rookie for decades afterward. Food was never Red's only worry, though. Long before Jones ever ordered a stack of pancakes, Red had already clashed with a flashy young guard whose game seemed built more for entertaining the hometown crowd than for winning basketball games the way Red wanted them won. Bob Cousy was already a huge celebrity in New England before he ever played a single game for the Celtics. He starred at Holy Cross, and by the time the 1950 draft rolled around, fans across the region were begging Boston to select him. Red had other plans. He passed on Cousy entirely and picked center Chuck Scher instead. When reporters and fans pushed back hard on the decision, Red fired back with a line that became famous. He asked whether he was supposed to win basketball games or simply take care of the local favorite everybody in town happened to love. Red's real problem with Cousy went beyond the draft snub. He genuinely distrusted Cousy's style of play. Cousy loved behind-the-back dribbles and no-look passes that made crowds gasp. But Red saw all of that flash as a lack of real discipline, the exact opposite of what a championship team needed from its point guard. A dispersal draft eventually brought Cousy to Boston anyway, almost by accident. And Red suddenly had to coach the very player he had refused to draft in the first place. Once Cousy actually arrived, Red spent his early seasons pulling him out of games whenever his passing got too loose or too showy for the moment. Red demanded structured decision-making instead of highlight reel moves. He wanted controlled possessions, not passes designed to make the crowd roar. Slowly, Cousy adapted to what Red was asking of him. His natural creativity did not disappear. Instead, it became the engine behind one of the most effective fast-break offenses basketball had ever seen, all while staying inside the structure Red had built around it. Being popular with local fans never proved that Cousy could actually run a winning offense, and Red made sure that lesson stuck early. A flashy pass that broke down the team's spacing or rhythm was worthless to Red no matter how much the crowd loved it. Red had to strip away Cousy's instinct to perform piece by piece before real greatness could take its place. Cousy only became one of the finest players in league history after he accepted that Red's system mattered far more than his own personal style ever could. It would have been easy for Red to simply let Cousy keep entertaining the crowd. The fans loved every no-look pass and every behind-the-back dribble, and a lesser coach might have let popularity guide his decisions instead of discipline. Red never worked that way. He cared about winning championships, not selling tickets through flashy highlights, and he was willing to bench a local hero in the middle of a game if that was what it took to make his point. Over time, Cousy came to respect that approach, even if he did not always enjoy it in the moment. He later credited much of his own greatness to the structure Red forced onto his game during those early years, structure he had originally resisted with everything he had. It is a strange twist that the very coach who once snubbed him on draft day became the person most responsible for turning him into a legend. But that contradiction sits at the heart of almost every story on this list. This particular story ends on a fairly gentle note. Cousy responded to the criticism, adjusted his game, and became a cornerstone of the early Celtics dynasty. But the players who came after him did not always respond the same way. By the late 1970s, the issue Red faced was no longer a single bad habit that could be corrected with a few benchings. The culture of the entire organization was starting to crack from the inside. Boston brought in Sidney Wicks from Portland in 1976, and he landed in town as a highly paid forward with strong personal scoring numbers already behind him. On paper, it looked like a real upgrade. On the court, his style clashed hard with the way Boston had always played the game. Wicks liked to hold the ball. He attacked in isolation, drove into crowded lanes by himself, and often ignored open teammates standing just a few feet away. Red saw this kind of basketball as the complete opposite of everything the Celtics stood for. Wicks still put up respectable individual numbers during his time in Boston. Good stats on paper did not translate into a team that actually worked well together, though. Veteran center Dave Cowens grew so frustrated with the direction the roster had taken that he stepped away from the team for a while, taking a temporary leave rather than keep playing through the frustration building around him. Historians and front office people who studied this era later pointed directly at Wicks's arrival as a moment that badly damaged the locker room culture the Celtics had spent decades building. Look closely at the numbers from those 2 seasons. In 1976-77, Wicks played all 79 games. He averaged 15, 1 points and 10, 0 rebounds a night, and he shot 8% from the field. That season, Boston finished 44-38 and lost in the conference semifinals. The very next year, in 1977-78, Wicks again played heavy minutes across 81 games. His scoring dropped to 13, 4 points a game, his rebounds fell to 8, 3, and his shooting slipped to 2%. Boston collapsed to 32-50 that season and missed the playoffs completely. That contrast matters. A player can look good on a stat sheet and still be dragging his own team down in ways a box score will never show. Wicks's double-doubles could not measure how much he slowed down the offense on a given night, how frustrated his teammates became standing around watching him work alone, or how much trust quietly eroded inside that locker room. Red believed that selfish, one-man basketball, repeated possession after possession, had the power to poison an entire team's spirit over time. Wicks became a clear example of talent that simply did not fit the culture Red had spent decades protecting. Think about what it actually looks like from the bench during a game like that. 4 teammates stand spread out, hands ready, expecting the ball to come their way at some point. Instead, Wicks drives alone into 3 defenders, forces up a contested shot, and the whole possession ends with nothing to show for it except a stat line that still reads well the next morning in the newspaper. Multiply that pattern across dozens of games in a single season, and it becomes easy to understand why a proud veteran like Dave Cowens finally reached a breaking point and needed time away from the team just to clear his head. Red saw this pattern build for months before it finally boiled over, and by the time it did, the damage to team chemistry had already been done. To be fair, nobody claims Wicks alone wrecked the Celtics during those years. Ownership instability and a wave of roster changes played their own part in the decline too. But Wicks's arrival opened the door to an even rockier stretch, because right behind him came another skilled player whose pace and attitude made an already difficult situation even worse for Boston. It is worth remembering that Wicks had been a genuine star in Portland before the trade, the kind of player most teams would have been thrilled to add to their roster. That is exactly what made his time in Boston such a hard lesson for Red. A gifted player is not automatically a good fit, and a winning resume somewhere else does not guarantee anything once a player puts on a new jersey with different expectations attached to it. Curtis Rowe arrived in Boston through a 3-team trade back in October of 1976, a deal that pushed beloved defensive anchor Paul Silas out of town in the process. Red made this move under real financial pressure at the time, and looking back, it clearly backfired. Rowe came to Boston with an impressive resume. He had won 3 NCAA championships at UCLA, playing under the legendary coach John Wooden. None of that pedigree showed up in the way he actually played once he put on a Celtics jersey. On the court, Rowe dribbled far too long on almost every possession. He slowed the offense down to a crawl, instead of pushing the pace the way Boston always had. He rarely ran the floor with any real urgency, and he never came close to replacing the defensive value that Paul Silas had provided before the trade sent him away. Red watched all of this happen and grew more frustrated by the week. The moment that truly damaged Rowe's standing with Red came after a tough loss. In the locker room, Rowe turned to his struggling teammates and told them, almost casually, that wins and losses were not written down anywhere on their paychecks. That single comment cut directly against everything Red believed about competition. Red felt that once a player stopped caring whether the team actually won or lost, no amount of skill could make up for that missing piece. Look at how Rowe's numbers slid across his time in Boston. In 1976-77, he played 79 games, averaging 10, 1 points and 7, 1 rebounds while shooting 8%, as Boston finished 44-38. By 1977-78, his playing time had already dropped to just 51 games. His scoring fell to 6, 1 points and his rebounding to 4, 0, and Boston collapsed to a record of 32-50. The following year, 1978-79, he appeared in 53 games, averaging only 7 points and 6 rebounds as Boston bottomed out at 29-53. Red could forgive a player for making mistakes on the court. Everybody made mistakes, even the greats. What Red could never forgive was a player suggesting out loud that the final score simply did not matter. Rowe's college success at UCLA only made his lack of urgency in Boston feel more disappointing by comparison. Eventually, Red stopped counting on him for anything beyond the current season and phased him fully out of the team's long-term plans. Think about how differently that one comment about paychecks must have landed inside a locker room, built entirely around Red's competitive standards. Every other player in that room had grown up under the idea that winning was the entire point, the only real measure of success that mattered. Rowe's remark cut against everything Red had spent decades building, and it likely stung teammates just as much as it stung Red himself. A player could miss shots, get beat on defense, or have an off night, and Red would coach through all of that patiently. A player who openly questioned whether winning even mattered anymore was a different problem entirely, one that Red believed could spread through a roster far faster than any losing streak ever could. Soon after Rowe's decline, Celtics ownership brought in an even bigger name without asking Red for his blessing at all, setting up one of the most bitter conflicts of Red's entire career in Boston. Rowe's story stands out because it shows that talent and effort are two completely separate things in Red's eyes. Rowe clearly had the physical tools, proven by 3 national championships at one of the best programs in college basketball history. What he lacked, at least once he reached Boston, was the burning desire to win that Red demanded from every single player wearing the jersey, and no amount of raw skill could ever make up for that missing piece. Owner John Y. Brown acquired Bob McAdoo in February of 1979, and he made the entire deal without ever consulting Red. Boston sent 3 first-round draft picks to the New York Knicks just to bring McAdoo to town, a staggering price for one player. Red was so angry about being cut out of the decision that he seriously considered resigning from the Celtics altogether. He even thought about crossing over to accept a general manager job with the very team Boston had just traded with. There was no question that McAdoo could score. He had won 3 straight scoring titles while playing in Buffalo before the trade, and his shooting touch never really left him. The problem was everything wrapped around that scoring. McAdoo's game revolved almost entirely around his own shot attempts and his own personal numbers. He regularly launched close to 20 shots a night, chasing his own totals possession after possession. Meanwhile, his defensive rotations were weak, and his willingness to set up teammates barely existed at all. Red criticized him openly for caring more about his personal statistics than the team's success, and he did not hold back when reporters asked him about it. McAdoo only played 26 games in a Celtics uniform before the whole experiment ended. During that short stretch, he averaged 20, 6 points and 1 rebounds a night while shooting an even 50% from the field. Those numbers looked impressive sitting alone on a stat sheet. They did nothing to fix the deeper problems on the roster. Boston finished that season at 29-53 and missed the playoffs entirely. The exact kind of season Red had spent his whole career trying to prevent. At first glance, 20 points a night from McAdoo should have helped any team win games. Red argued that those points meant almost nothing inside a locker room this broken. 20 points did not repair a defense that kept collapsing. Efficient shooting did not rebuild trust between teammates, who no longer moved the ball to each other. And nothing about McAdoo's arrival changed the fact that it had already cost Boston 3 future first-round picks and very nearly cost the team its architect too. Boston finally traded McAdoo away to Detroit before the start of the 1979-80 season. In return, the Celtics received defensive specialist M.L. Carr along with additional assets that quietly helped build the next Celtics dynasty just a few years later. Red never blamed McAdoo's talent for any of this. His criticism was aimed squarely at fit, at priorities, and at the reckless way the entire trade had been handled from the very beginning. McAdoo's arrival became a lasting lesson inside the organization about the danger of treating a famous scorer as an automatic fix for a struggling roster. Boston only started climbing back toward greatness once it stopped chasing McAdoo's kind of individual brilliance and started rebuilding carefully around real fit instead. Looking back, the entire McAdoo chapter reads like a warning label for every front office that ever gets tempted by a big name over a good fit. 3 first-round picks are an enormous price for any single player, and giving them up without even consulting the man who had built 16 championships was almost guaranteed to end badly. Red's near resignation over the whole ordeal shows just how seriously he took being cut out of a decision that size. He had spent his entire career proving that the right combination of players mattered more than any single star's scoring average. And watching ownership ignore that lesson so completely must have felt like a personal insult on top of a basketball mistake. Red could always point a finger at ownership for pushing McAdoo onto his roster without permission. The very next name on his list hurt in a completely different way, because this time, the player who let him down was someone Red had personally trusted for years. There is an important distinction between McAdoo and the players who came before him on this list. Heinzen, Jones, and Kuzi each responded to Red's criticism by adjusting their habits. McAdoo never really got that chance to prove himself one way or the other, since the deal itself was doomed from the moment ownership went around Red's authority. In some ways, McAdoo became a symbol of everything Red feared about losing control over his own roster, a warning that stuck with him for the rest of his career in the front office. Cedric Maxwell had already given the Celtics one of the greatest postseason performances in franchise history, winning the 1981 Finals MVP award and becoming a vital piece of a front court that included Larry Bird, Kevin McHale, and Robert Parrish. For years, Maxwell was exactly the kind of player Red held up as a success story, not a disappointment. That reputation started to crack during the 1984 offseason. Maxwell held out that summer during a contract dispute with the team, and he missed the entire training camp while the two sides argued over money. When he finally rejoined the roster, Red noticed an immediate drop in his conditioning and in the intensity he brought to every possession. Despite his own frustration, Red still went to bat for Maxwell behind closed doors, pushing team ownership to give him a large and lucrative contract extension because of everything he had already accomplished for the franchise. Once that new contract was signed, though, Maxwell's play grew noticeably more sluggish on the court. He suffered a knee injury in February of 1985, and his recovery from that injury moved far slower than Red expected or wanted. Maxwell was not consistently available during some of the most important stretches of that postseason run, right when the team needed him the most. Red became convinced that Maxwell had played much harder the year before, back when he still had a new contract to chase, than he did now that the money had already landed safely in his pocket. Red felt genuinely betrayed by what he was watching, and he said so publicly. He pointed out that Maxwell's knee had been just as sore the year before, during his contract push. Yet somehow he had still managed to play some of the best basketball of his career that season. Red used an old saying to sum up exactly how he felt about the whole situation. "Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me." Not long after making that statement, Red traded Maxwell away to the Los Angeles Clippers. In return, Boston received center Bill Walton, a move that ended up strengthening the bench heading into the legendary 1986 championship season. Look at the numbers from that final season in Boston. Maxwell played 57 games in 1984-85, averaging 1 point and 2 rebounds while shooting an efficient 53% from the field. Boston still finished that season with a strong 63-19 record, but the team ultimately lost in the NBA Finals, falling just short of the title Red always demanded. This entire story was never really about whether Maxwell had enough talent. Red already knew exactly what Maxwell was capable of on the biggest stage in basketball. This story was about trust, and about what happens when that trust quietly disappears. Maxwell had already proven what his best effort looked like on a championship stage, which made his later decline feel completely avoidable in Red's eyes rather than some unlucky accident. Red's response was never another speech or another public lecture. This time, his answer was a trade that turned real disappointment into one more championship roster move. There is something almost sad about the Maxwell chapter compared to the others on this list. Red had genuinely fought for Maxwell behind closed doors, pushing hard to get him the big contract he wanted. That kind of effort from Red usually signaled real trust, the sort of trust he rarely extended to players who had not already proven themselves on the biggest stages. Watching that trust seem to evaporate the moment the ink dried on the contract clearly hurt Red in a way that a simple losing streak never could. It is one thing to trade away a player who never fit the system. It is another thing entirely to trade away a player who once embodied everything the system was supposed to produce. Maxwell's story closes out this list on its most personal note. Heinzen, Jones, and Kuzi were early tests that helped Red build his standards in the first place. Wicks, Rowe, and McAdoo represented outside forces crashing into a culture Red had already built. Maxwell was different from all of them because he had lived inside that culture, thrived inside it, and briefly stepped outside its boundaries anyway. That made his fall from Red's trust the hardest one to watch, and the hardest one for Red himself to accept. All 7 of these stories circle back to the same simple idea: the Celtics way that Red spent his entire life defending. His criticism was rarely gentle, and it was almost never comfortable for the player on the receiving end of it. Some of the men on this list, like Heinzen, Jones, and Kuzi, became legends precisely because they accepted Red's correction and grew from it instead of pushing back. Others, like Wicks, Rowe, McAdoo, and eventually Maxwell, left Boston because their habits simply never lined up with what the franchise demanded from every single player who wore the jersey. The standard itself never changed across any of these different eras. Talent always mattered to Red, there is no denying that, but conditioning mattered more, trust mattered more. Defense, unselfish passing, and genuine sacrifice for the man standing next to you mattered more than any of it. Red never judged a player's true value by his salary, his popularity with the crowd, or his personal scoring average on a given night. He judged every single player by one question alone: did you help this team win? That same question still echoes through Boston today. Through every trade, every playoff collapse, and every argument about who let this current group of Celtics down. Whether the era involves victory cigars or modern max contracts, the basic idea never really changes. A team wins when players trust each other more than they chase their own glory, and it starts to fall apart the moment that trust breaks down, no matter how much individual talent is standing on the floor, no matter what the box score says the next morning. That was Red Auerbach's real gift. He did not only find great players, he made sure the name on the front of the jersey stayed greater than every name on the back.